Good morning or good afternoon, ladies, and welcome to Torah with the Takeaway, Parshas Shemos. Today I'm entitling the class, Emulating Some of the Secrets of the Previous Geulah. Now, there are so much to say. I had to leave a lot of material out because otherwise we'd be here all day. But I'm trying to take some key topics that we can learn from the previous Geulah and apply it to our present day Geulah. Yes, Hashem B'Karov. You know, we are now entering the weeks that are called Shovavim, starting with Shemos until Mishpatim. These are the winter weeks, but there are many, I saw like Rav Shimshon Pinkus mentions, like many other Gedolim mentioned, this is the time people used to fast. There's extra time people spend on learning. A lot of times they have Chazar with Taras Mishpacha for men this time of year, I remember. These are the times that you really can fix any problems with Kedusha. And these are the parshas that we're trying to parallel, talking about the Geulas Mitzrayim. We had in the first book of the Torah, we have Sefer Bereshis, is called Sefer HaYetzirah, the book of creation. You know, that's when we find that, you know, the Hashem created the world. Yeah, Shavavim, that's right. Tata, also, you're right. You're 100% right, because this year we have Ibr Yor, a leap year. But these weeks instruct us. Now, Sefer Shemos is called Sefer HaGeulah. This is the book talking about the trials and tribulations until the Jews extricated themselves from the horrible problems they faced in Egypt. And hopefully we hope to parallel that today. Now, first thing, it's a bit of a digression, but I couldn't resist it. I really could not resist this. I saw in Rav Shimshon Pinkus, I was looking through his works, and you know, his works were written at least 50 years ago, if not more. And he wrote something that you would think is written for today, that's current events for today. And I can't believe that, so I had to quote it because this is the Torah outlook on what is going on today. Very, very interesting in this week's Parsha, and it is paralleled by our current events. In Perek Aleph, the first chapter of Shemos, Pasuk Tes, verse 9, Paro, whether it was a new Paro or the old Paro that just changed his tune, he was getting concerned that the Jewish people were multiplying. He says, Haven ischak malo, let's be ahead of them, let's be smart about them. Pen yirba v'yak sikre'ena milchama, and if they grow and reproduce too much, if they're going to be and there's going to be a war of some sort, they will fight with us and we'll lose. So he was telling them that the Jews are oppressors, and for this reason we have to think of plans how we can get rid of the Jewish problem. So these are the words of Shimshon Pinkus written over 50 years ago. Unbelievable. He says, society often likes to, there's two terms used often in society and when we speak about societies or races or classes of people, there is the rodef and the nirdaf. There's the person that is the pursuer, and there's the person who is pursued. And there's one advantage to being a pursued. The one advantage is when you are the class or race that is being pursued, person feels like people aren't giving me a fair shake. And that, believe it or not, says Rav Shimshon Pinkus, gives a person strength to continue on. Because if you guys are the upper class and look what you are, then I really am not embarrassed to be of my class at all. And I don't feel like I'm a pursued person. Whereas when we're speaking about somebody who's on the other hand, the pursuer, then it gets to be he's not popular in public opinion. People think a certain, class of people are privileged or whatever, it's a problem. In fact, a lot of times if a person feels he's been unjust, even though he'll get all upset, he may fight for his rights and all that, at least they feel ultimately justice is going to turn and I didn't hurt anybody. I was only the pursued. It says in this week's Parsha, Vayareu osanu hamitzrim, what the Egyptian calculation was to make the Jews look raw, to make them look bad. They are the pursuing class. They are our enemies. They're going to destroy us. This is like the best strategy that people often employ when they are stuck. If you really want to get rid of another class of people, just say they're out to get you and they're going to kill you and you're threatened by their existence. And then don't have to wait too long and you make a whole uprising and all kinds of things are going to happen because of that. So that's what Paro's intention was. He wanted to control, us eventually. And the way he did it, he first started, he said, look, Yosef, he brings the different midrashim and everything. He says, Yosef brought down his family to Egypt. Why did they bring them down? Because he was to feed his own family. And eventually they're going to multiply and they're going to take us over and the Egyptians will be the minority slavery class. They're going to kill us all. Says Rav Shimshon Pincus, this tactic has been forever employed by anti-Semites throughout history. Hitler Yamach Shemos said he was a believer in evolution. And he believed that we were the enemies of humanity. He said, how are we enemies of humanity? Because in general, usually, according to the theory of evolution, which has since been debunked several thousand times, but in the theory of evolution, the fittest is what survives. And he said, we want the stronger of all classes to exist. And the Jews, the way they figure out world there is they have compassion, they believe in hospitals, they believe leaving people on machines and not committing suicide. All these type of things are a detriment to society because the fittest will not survive this way necessarily. There'll be all the weaklings around them. So if you kill the Jews, then you're going to have a society of people. We don't need compassionate people. We don't need a drain on our system. We need a system. Just think, Canadians especially, we're talking to you, and just think what he's saying, that we want a system whereas the fittest will survive and the Jews don't fit into this fittest idea. They really, in fact, going to ruin everything because by them existing, they're like the conscience of the world. And, we're just living according to statistics versus the idea of morality. And morality gets in the way. Once you get God in there and you get morality in there, you have a problem. So in both cases, says Rav Shimshon Pincus, Paro and Hitler Yamach Shemo, both them did not achieve their goal, because even though they told everybody that we were pursuers and we're ruining it for them and our race is a threat to their race, what ended up happening was the Jews knew that we are not the pursuers, that we are still considered the people that are being abused. And as long as we're pursued, the world has mercy. And listen to what he said 50 years ago. He says, as soon as the Jews turn around and pursue the others, God forbid, with warfare, or they start winning warfare, the world looks at them and says, oh, you people are the pursuing class, and you become unpopular, and everyone even is stronger in their commitment that you're threatening them. He was referring to something that happened in his time. There was somebody that murdered, he said he's not going to discuss his opinion about it, and neither am I, but he was talking about somebody who a Jew got up and murdered a bunch of Arabs in the Maras Machpelah many years ago. And he was saying, people think, like they're doing something, but what happens is society becomes less sympathetic to you. Often governments, especially if they have liberal views, they're afraid to even deal with you because then it looks like they're not sympathetic to the pursuer, the pursued class. So you make problems for yourself. So that's a very interesting theory, and it's really being all over the news today. The same ideas that, who's the pursued and who's the pursuer, and that's the whole fight here. But one thing he throws in at the very end, which is the message for us, that's not just current events, that's really a Torah lesson. We have to know something. When Hashem switches the switch and he turns us from being the pursued class into the pursuers, and then the world looks at us and says, wait a minute. You're not supposed to be this strong man type of a thing. This is not your portion in the world. This is not your place in the world. We have to know that if Hashem is pointing the finger at us and he's telling us if we're in trouble with anti-Semitism or whatever it may be, we're at fault because we have to do more spiritual efforts to put us back in this lowly secondary class where people won't bother us and we won't have murders or anything anymore, but people will leave us alone. He said it's our fault because of our spiritual stature. Gives an example. It was a famous story that was going around many years ago. And that story is, his version at least, there were two young men sitting on a plane, two frum boys. And he said, one boy was pulled out. He was hungry in the middle of the airplane ride, so he decided to pull out. He had a whole package of wafers, and he pulled out his wafers. He was munching on them, and he keeps noticing that the other boy next to his seatmate is taking from his wafers. He takes one, the other guy takes one. He takes another, the other guy takes, and at the very end, there's one left, and the other guy takes it, breaks it in half, and gives it to him. And he's thinking, what nerve? You have such nerve. These are my wafers, and you're splitting them with me. I'm doing you a favor helping you. Lo and behold, he later looks in his satchel and he notices that his wafers were never taken out. He was eating all the time from the other boy's wafers, and the other boy was just being kind and sharing it with him. We too are going to look at ourselves as we were the oppressed ones, and it's this kind of people that are terrorizing us, and those kind of people, and Haman and Hitler and everybody that we have to accuse. But he said the real thing you have to know is that it's your fault. You're going to look back and you're going to realize it was me all along, blaming them, and really it was my fault. He says we need to know. There was a story about I believe it's Rav Chaim Shmulevitz that's out. During one of the wars in Eretz Yisrael, there was a whole bunch of fighting going on and blaming going on, and there were missiles flying overhead in Israel, and there was a boy in his yeshiva that wasn't learning properly, and Rav Chaim Shmulevitz rebuked him and he told him, "You're a murderer, because every minute you learn, you're doing your share for the war effort, and every time you don't learn, you're not." Now, we can't be hard on ourselves and expect every second to be on the go, but we have to keep reminding ourselves. It's already like over, I don't know how many months it is, 2.5 months already, this war is in progress, and who knows how much longer it's going to last. We have to make sure that we're doing our efforts. And for a woman, I heard from Chaim Mintz Shlita, he says specifically, women have to take on more chesed. We have to feel with our brethren. There's so many people suffering, and we have to be with them in their fate, what they're going through right now. And we have to still feel like it. But it's a very interesting thing about being turned into a pursuer, and that's the classic anti-Semitic thing initiated by Paro, and it's still going on till today. Okay, that was my side point, but I just felt you'd all feel that's a very interesting point to mention. Now let's piece together some lessons we can learn from this week's Parsha. We find that when Moshe Rabbeinu was born in this week's Parsha, that when he was born, there was a big light that filled the house, and then he was put in the basket, and he was sent off to Paro. Basha Bas Paro took had mercy for him, and she took him in. And Moshe, when he was in the house of Batya, he refused to nurse from any of the Egyptian nursemaids that wanted to feed him. And he went from woman to woman, and he would refuse to nurse until they found him a Jewish nursemaid. And who was it? It was his own mother, Yocheved, which was really impressive. And the reason we're told, Rashi says, Lefishahu asidu daberi mashchina, because he's ultimately going to be speaking with Hashem. This mouth that's going to have only God's words emanating from it should not be nursing from an idolater. But we know that story of Moshe Rabbeinu. But there's something very interesting in Yoreh De'ah. The Ramah brings down that a person cannot employ a non-Jewish or an idolatrous as a nursemaid for their child, because just like Moshe Rabbeinu was not allowed to nurse from an idolatress, any Jewish baby is not allowed to do so, because it gives a bad nature to the child if he's nursing from someone who believes in idols. Why does it get bad nature? What does nature have to do with belief? That's a whole story. We believe in our Torah that belief stems from having good nature. If a person is such a pursuer of truth that nothing will get in his way, then he has to believe in a God. But sometimes people have their own agendas, and they get in the way, and they stop them from keeping certain commandments because of their biases, their personal biases. Just 1 minute, please. We have a question to ask. How could Ramah learn halacha from Moshe Rabbeinu? Doesn't it say, Lo kam b'Yisrael kamoshe od? There was never another person in the Jewish people like Moses. And we're learning a halacha for practical halachas from a medrash that, that Moshe Rabbeinu refused to nurse from, idolaters. So we, all halacha, cannot employ wet nurses that are idolatrous. And the answer given, I saw this also by Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, but I saw it at this time also by Mikdash Halevi. He brings down that the reason why all Jewish children have to go by this rule is we don't know who could be possible Mashiach. We have to treat each Jewish child as a potential Moshe Rabbeinu. And as it says, Al Tiftechu, and it says that the Tinokas shall base Rabin, that the small children are the ones that are going to bring Mashiach ultimately. Because anyways, it says in the Rambam that every Jew at his or her own level has a potential to be like Moshe Rabbeinu. Not that we're going to have Hashem necessarily speaking out of our mouth, but all of us have a potential in Olam Haba with the strength of the gifts we've been given to achieve the same levels like Moshe Rabbeinu. The lesson from this, says the Mikdash Halevi, from the way Moshe Rabbeinu grew up, is that a lot of times people take on certain leniencies. Oh, they're just kids. But we have to understand that, these kids have a potential. Al tigu b'mshichai, that's what verse I was looking for. Don't touch my mashichim. Uvin bi'ai al tareu. Don't hurt my neviim. Who is this? Rashi says it's the tinoka shabes rabin. My mashichim, the potential mashichim, are all the children. And we have to realize that the atmosphere, the environment we put the children in, it's just a little movie, it's just a little this, that, or the other. All these things, these are potential Mashiachim, which we do this if we knew our child was the destined Mashiach. So we have to look at every child as being a potential Mashiach. In a similar vein, we find in this week's Parsha of Aryeh Bach Zatzal mentions that many verses talk about how Moshe Rabbeinu grew up. It says by Dal Hayeled, and then later it says by Dal Moshe, and Moshe grew up by Yetze El Achav, and he went to his brothers and he saw their suffering. And then Chazal, even though Chazal tell us that every person is supposed to tell himself, when can I be like Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov? Every Jew is obligated to say that. Rav Bach says, we don't say that about Moshe Rabbeinu. He was given special characteristics that no Jew was given. On the other hand, there are many lessons from this week's parsha about Moshe Rabbeinu that behoove us to learn, because his mitos, his attributes, his character, that we should emulate. We can't be like him as not his level of prophecy, but we can be like him in the way he acted and behaved. Okay, so let's now look at how Moshe Rabbeinu behaved. First of all, interesting thing, his name, Moshe. I'm just going to be fixing the camera because I am still not happy. Okay, yeah, that's a little bit better. Okay, anyways, so the when Batsia stretched out her arm and reached him and brought him in, she called him Moshe. That's his name for posterity, to show her good act saved the whole Jewish people. One person, and she's a convert, one person can affect the entire Jewish people. We find Miriam and Yochevet's act of self-sacrifice to allow babies to live, being midwives. That was what brought them to have kahuna and malchus. They were able to have the mothers, the matriarchs of all the Kohanim and all the kings, just because of these acts of self-sacrifice. But Bachi, interesting, the name should have been Masui. Masui means he was lifted up, he was carried. Moshe means he carries. He carries, or he was brought. He brings, instead of he was brought. Masui would have been he was brought, because he was a passive object in her saving of him. But she called him Moshe. First of all, she's being more selfless by her name, her choice of names. But she's also calling him Moshe to say she wanted her act to be copied by him. And in fact, it was. He was the one that brought in the Jewish people, that brought them up to Har Sinai, that brought them up in their learning and their Torah and their fear of Hashem. Now, when we see episodes with Moshe Rabbeinu, the first time we see him open his mouth or do some action when he's close to 80 years old. And it says, Vayar Basivlo Sam. No, I'm sorry, he was younger. He must have been close to 40. Sorry. Vayar Basivlo Sam. And he saw their affliction. And we're told by Rashi, Nasan Eina Velibo Lios Meitzar Alehem. He put his eyes and his heart to feel for their torture. And we have to think about it. He's a man that was raised in the house of Paro, total luxury. And in fact, the Ibn Ezra tells us the reason he was raised with such luxury for two reasons. Number one, so later he knows how to act like a king, a leader. He's going to watch Paro act like a king, although maybe he's not such a good person, but he's a king nonetheless. And also, so the Jews should revere him more. You know, you're a famous man. We tend to, unfortunately, people tend to look up to something that either looks beautiful or has a good name to it or something like that. But here's Moshe Rabbeinu growing up in that situation, and he could have had an easy life. And in fact, we're going to see he risks his life for the Jewish people. The Alter von Kelm tells us there are three incidences where we see Moshe Rabbeinu in action. Number one, he first of all, he sees their affliction. That's the first thing he mentions. The second thing, he sees an Egyptian attacking a Jew. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar, that Egyptian was he was attacking the husband, Dasan Aviram, as of in the fame of Dasan Aviram. Dasan was married to Shlomis Bas Dibri. In case you recognize that name, this is the one woman that wasn't chaste in Egypt because she used to be a little too friendly to everyone. And one time this Egyptian came to her house when her husband was at home, and the rest is horrible history. Anyways, so the husband was very upset at the Egyptian. And in fact, he got into a whole argument whether he should divorce his wife with his brother-in-law. His brother-in-law was Aviram. And they're into this big fight. They were always the bad guys fighting with Moshe all the time. And Dasan was being this Egyptian that had just, defiled his wife, was now coming after the husband, Dasan. And Moshe Rabbeinu saved his life by employing God's name Kabbalistically and by saying it. And he thought very carefully first, because he doesn't just kill somebody blindly. He was very thought out. He was trying to think prophetically of all his future generations. Would there be a convert coming from them? Would there be anyone of value coming from them? And then he risked his life. And once Paro heard that, he was always hearing rumors that Moshe's a Jew and all this kind of thing. And yet Paro, once he heard that Moshe actually killed an Egyptian, then he became a fugitive and had to run for his life for many years. So he risked his life because of his compassion for another Jew, and even not such a good Jew. And the third time we find it is there were two Jews fighting, Dasan and Aviram, and he told them, "Why are you fighting with each other?" He stuck his neck out, which was not common. And then I believe that Rav Bakst adds a fourth time. He says, even the time of the daughters of Yisro, the shepherds were bothering them, annoying them, and they were able to draw from the water because Moshe protected them and allowed them to draw. I think he even drew the water for them rather than to have the shepherds bother them when they went to the well. Moshe Rabbeinu was always thinking of the other. He even chased after sheep that were running away from the flock, and he carried them on his shoulders. And right after that is when he saw the burning bush. Rav Bakst tells us that usually when somebody is fighting, you see a fight, most people are afraid to get involved or be a witness. What do I need this for? Why do I need to get involved? But Moshe Rabbeinu could not stand injustice. And also he had this feeling of wanting to be out there for the other person. And they even told him, Mi samcha la'ish sar v'shofet. Who made you the ruler over us, when he got involved in their argument? Seemingly they were right, but a king has to be willing to put his life on the line for the truth. And we find the same thing echoed by the people that were the taskmasters in Egypt. You would call them, they were called similar to the capos, but they were very different in their behavior. These people that the Egyptians put as taskmasters over the Jewish slaves, when the Jews didn't fulfill their quota, the taskmasters would take the abuse. They would let themselves be whipped rather than to whip other Jews. And these people ended up becoming the Sanhedrin. or really the Nicaean rather, they're like the Sanhedrin, the Shivim Zakanim, the 70 elders in the desert that became great, and they had prophecy and everything because they were willing to stick their neck out for others. So this is what we see. It doesn't say that Moshe Rabbeinu kept Yashan, doesn't say the latest Humra and the latest texture he's not eating. It talks about Moshe Rabbeinu giving up his life and soul for other people, willing to give up everything to help another Yid. This is the greatness. Now, even though this is reserved for a king has got to reach that level. We Jews are all considered B'nai Malachim. We're all children of kings. We have a special week vis-a-vis the other nations of the world. We're supposed to be giving a message of morality, and there's supposed to be lessons, a light to the nations. We're supposed to be, the ones that are leaders in a certain respect, at least morally, to the rest of the world. And that's really same thing. That's what the Shotrim, they had to be the leaders of the Jewish people because they had the proper characteristics that are necessary to be leaders. And if we want to be a good Jew and we want to be truly leaders, a light to the nations, one way to become that, to reach out for Geulah when we really will be in actuality a light to the nations, is by getting into this trait of caring about justice for others. And of course, there is a question of justice. Go to your local Orthodox rabbi. This question of din Torah and police, et cetera, et cetera. That's all beyond the scope of this class. You have to ask shilas and do what's appropriate, for those type of things. But we should care deeply and be deeply involved. When somebody's in pain, we should be there for him. And we have to think deeply about the other person to feel. Rav Chaim Mintzschlita tells us that Hashem purposely revealed himself to Moshe in the burning bush, a thorn bush, to show that Hashem felt our pain of slavery. Imo anochi b'tzara. I am with you in your pain. Hashem says that to the Jewish people. The Maharal says that the reason why it's so important, he's giving some reasons why this is such an outstanding trait that we have to possess, not just be a leader. But he says the Torah was given to the entire nation. And each person has like a letter, so to speak, in the Torah is supposed to be 600,000 more or less letters, corresponding to the number of souls in the world. Each person has a letter in the Torah, the Ramchal tells us, and whenever you are caring about that, you are getting closer to Torah. It's one of the 48 ways to acquire Torah. Is one of the things is to feel for your brethren like you would yourself. Caring actually not only is it good for your soul, but it actually helps. Saras rabim chatzi nechama. When there's a lot of people suffering the same thing, it's half of a comfort. Like, in other words, if somebody sees you care for him, it's a big comfort. Back in the day, when I was in labor, I had labor coaches, and I was successful in having natural childbirth every time. And one of the reasons was there was somebody with me that was there with me, feeling with me at the same time. When you have that, when you're not alone, when you feel like somebody's there for you, it takes away some of your pain. And you really feel, this is from Marsha and Gittin, the Saras Rabim Chatzi Nechama, the person, when the public, many people experience something together, it's a bit of a comfort. You don't feel like you're isolated. You don't feel like you're all alone. Now, when Bnei Israel saw that Moshe cared, it does alleviate their suffering. But there's more. Even if you aren't seen, it still affects you because we are all in the Torah. You are really affecting because you're binding yourself with the Torah and with the other Jew. Even if they don't see it, you're concerned for them. But it's going to have an impact because it is felt when there's something, Hashem is in pain, and it's part of the Torah, so to speak, is in pain because the Jewish people are all incorporated with the Torah, then you bind with them and you are mitigating their pain, even if they don't even see you. Simcha Zissel from Kelm used to say that the hardest thing really is to feel people's joy. He said it's easy because the first thing a person feels when he sees somebody in pain is he says, Baruch Hashem, it wasn't me. Now, Victor Miller says that is the first thing we should do, by the way. He says, what's the first thing you should tell yourself when somebody else suffers? Thank God it's not me. Now, that sounds terrible. That really sounds selfish. But the truth is, otherwise you're fooling yourself. We do feel we're a separate entity. But that's it. Once you get yourself out of the picture, now go straight for the other person and feel for them. Feel like how hard it could be. And it's a job. It's not an easy thing to achieve. Second page now. Okay. Now, we're told also that when the Jews were all united, we were then allowed to build the Mishkan, the tabernacle in the desert. It says, "Basuli mikdash v'shachanti b'socham." Make for me a tabernacle, and I will dwell amongst you, amongst all of you. And what's very famous when the Jews got the Torah, Vayichan Yisrael neged Ahar, the Jews were all one, like one entity. Whenever we unite with other Jews, united just means just not to be united, not to get into an argument. It means to actually feel for all of our brethren with everything they're going through. What happens is, then you have a union. And once that happens, there's more potential for Geulah. If we want God to bring his divine providence to the world again, the Shekhinah should return to the Beis Hamikdash and to Klal Yisrael. By feeling for our brethren, we're uniting with them, and that is a precondition for God bringing down the Shekhinah again. Also, sometimes by feeling with another person, we can take away an evil decree. Listen to this. Rav Mintz explains it. He says, if Reuven, let's say we'll give an example of two men, Reuven and Shimon. If Reuven feels for Shimon, now there's two people in pain. And if if Reuven was not meant to go through this torture that Shimon's going through, but he's in pain with him, sometimes God will mitigate the whole problem just because one of the people was not meant to suffer this. So therefore, the pain could be lessened or removed altogether. Also, it says sometimes you take away some of the punishment you're meant to get in the next world. If you feel for another person, you're putting yourself in pain for somebody else. If you put yourself in pain, you are mitigating your pain in the world to come because you cared about somebody else. That's what the Derech Hashem tells us. Rav Chaim Shmulevitz, so much. Rav Wolbe, let's first go through Rav Wolbe. Rav Wolbe Zatzal says that he believes, in his experience, the hardest trait for a person to acquire is to feel for the other. And Rav Wolbe was a big, you want to call him one of the Torah psychologists, very big on understanding the character of human beings. And he was a big believer that it's one of the hardest things. That's why it says by Rashi, Nasan Eina Velibo, Vayam Eitzar Alehem. You have to look and concentrate on the person standing in front of you and think of what they're going through. Now, if you don't know what they're going through, you could still know everyone's got something. We should really feel for our brethren, and as we said before, it's harder to feel the simcha for them. But even their pain, to feel the pain, to try to feel, it's something we really have to work on. Now, one of the things we could do, Rav Moshe Sternbach this week, I believe, was approached by people asking what we should do. And he said in the Shmona Esrei, there's a paragraph, Mekabetz Nidchei Amo Yisrael. When it talks about Hashem gathering the lost within the Jewish people, we should have kavanah when we say those words for all the hostages and all the people that are lost physically, spiritually. When we say Hashivenu Avinu L'Sarasecha, I'm adding this part, this is from other Rabbanim. Whenever we say return us to your Torah, we shouldn't just think of ourselves. In fact, the whole Shemona Esrei is written in the plural for us to constantly be aware that Hashem wants all of us. We should care about we shouldn't be happy until every single Jew has done tshuva, including ourselves, as we mentioned before with Rav Shimshon Pincus. We've got to worry if we're doing our portion. And we shouldn't be happy and settled until every single hostage is home, every single soldier is home, every single Jew is without fear and without danger. And some people, the way that they're just so maimed by all the horrors they went through in this war and other wars as well. Really, so it's very hard. Rav Chaim Shmulevitz, Zichron Livracha, who is this Rav right there, he, the Rosh Yeshiva of Mir, he knew the entire contents of the Mir library. Such a genius. Usually geniuses are not so people-friendly, let's put it that way. They're more into their books and into their learning and this thought and that thought and all these kind of things. Rav Chaim Shmulevitz was known as the concern he had for other Yidden. You must have heard some of the stories. I remember I'll say one of the most famous one probably about him is when there was the Entebbe situation in 1972. Chaim Shmulevitz was supposed to lead everybody into Hillel, and he was in the back of the room. And people turned around, they heard someone crying, and it was him. He was crying, profuse tears, crying and crying and crying. And he kept trying to make it to the front of the room where you're supposed to get up and say Tehillim for everybody, lead everybody in Tehillim. He couldn't stop crying. And then he turns around and he's about to start saying Tehillim, and he finally makes it to the front. He says, imagine if it was your brother. Imagine if it was your sister. That's what he would daven. Once somebody told him that they were told by the doctor they were going blind. He cried for this person for 20 minutes, and he never met him in his life. When he saw a child put on wearing a pair of shoes and walking with shoes for the first time, he would cry for the joy for the mother must be feeling right now to see her child in shoes. When they would read Megillus Rus, and everybody's tired, they were up the whole night Shavuos in Eretz Yisrael, that they read Megillus Rus the first day, which is the only day. He would be crying when they talked about Rus walking barefoot on her path on the way back to Eretz Yisrael with Naomi after she was a princess. So this is not, this is a midah that he worked on, because this is what Hashem wants of the Jewish leaders. And we are supposed to be leaders of ourselves. We have to control ourselves and not be so self-absorbed and think of the other person and be willing to put ourselves out for the other person, be it time, be it space, be it place, be it heart space, whatever. We are supposed to be willing to give to the other person. That's our mission on earth. Okay, so far, ladies, we've talked about the idea of a pursued and a pursuer. We've talked about the idea of Moshe Rabbeinu's birth to teach us how we're supposed to be so careful in raising our children. And we've spoken about the ins and outs of feeling for the other person. Okay, another great lesson we get from this week's Parsha, another major trait of Moshe Rabbeinu, is that of Moshe's growth. Now we have to understand, this is there for all the Bali Tshuva that are listening in, or all the Gerim that are listening in. The greatest Jew that ever lived did not learn in a yeshiva. He did not have a Rebbe. He didn't have a proper environment. He could have come from Kansas City for all that. He grew up in the palace of Paro in a depraved, immoral society. And when he was a refugee, he had to be a shepherd. And we're told in Shmos Rabbah, Eina Kadosh Baruch Hu nosen Geulah la'adam. God does not give greatness to a man ad shebodkehu b'davar katan, until God tests him with small things. The small things make the person. The daily chipping at yourself, exercises to work on bitachon, let's say, exercises to work on anger, whatever it is that we have, personship. There are plenty of books that address this. If we just 5 minutes a day try to address it, we were talking about last week what our big traits, good traits are and our bad traits are, investigating ourselves, trying to inform ourselves, trying to infuse ourselves with material that's going to address those traits that need work. If we only can do such a thing, little bits, you chisel out your personality until it can become pure. Anyways, when Moshe Rabbeinu had to tend sheep, he employed a lot of wisdom. This is when he was a refugee in Midian. It said that he would first send out the baby sheep, that their teeth weren't developed yet, so they would go to get the soft grass. Then he would next get the elderly, and then finally the strong, hardy sheep would get the hardest, the toughest grass to eat. He used wisdom. Even Rabak says it even spoke to sheep. Like he said, the Medrash says, he told the sheep that one sheep ran away and Moshe chased it, and he saw the sheep was drinking in the water. And Moshe says, oh, now I understand why you ran away. You were thirsty. And he took him on his shoulders and he brought him back to the flock. And right after that, God revealed himself to Moshe with the burning bush, because when the sheep led him to the burning bush. So what's the meaning of this whole thing here? What do we learn from Moshe Rabbeinu's episode with the sheep and everything? He said something very interesting. Sometimes if a person's has a menial job, person's employed in something lowly. Now, women a lot of times are changing diapers and washing dishes and vacuuming and doing all kinds of other things, doing laundry. Person does not usually exert the effort. Well, maybe if it's laundry, you want everything to look nice and everything, but let's say it's something very, very lowly, taking out the garbage. Person does not, but let's say a person has a real full-time job. Let's say he gives an example of a Rebbe who, was potential Rosh Hashiva, and he was instead, the only job he could find is first graders. He said, usually this person's going to be looking at his watch the whole day. When is it over? And not really extending so much effort because he feels I'm supposed to be doing something greater than this. I'm waiting for the moment where I'm going to be given the honor, the honorable moment. But the truth is, Moshe Rabbeinu, who was put in all these demeaning situations, he was put in a place of lowliness, either with sheep or he was also in a place of the Pharaoh's palace. He looked at those places as opportunities for growth. And every moment he's still plugged away. It's not God just wants us at the happy moments, the good moments when we're doing what finally we enjoy doing. But the moments that are not so happy, those are the moments that Hashem really is expecting from us to come through with some great things. Now, we find same thing happens later on. When Moshe Rabbeinu is running for his life, we find that he ends up getting married during that period of his life. Usually, it says Rabaks, people when they're fugitives for their life, they're not at the same time looking for a shidduch. But Moshe Rabbeinu did not let life push him back. He did not let the vicissitudes of life get to him. He looked at it as an opportunity. We have to view life as an opportunity, even in negative moments, because they're also destined by Hashem. By the sneh, it was on the other side of the coin. That was an opportunity. There was an unusual vision, and it said he turned and said, I'm going to turn around and look at this vision that I'm seeing right now. Like what we see from this is that this was a positive experience. He took even positive experiences and just turning your head and taking the extra minute to look at a leaf, to look at the snow falling in Toronto, because there's none here, to look at the flowers growing, to take that extra minute, it brings you closer to Hashem. He took the positive moments. It's a shame, says Rav Victor Miller, that people see, let's say, Niagara Falls, and they immediately pull out the camera or anything. Why don't we just soak it in? Why don't we just look at this? How great are Hashem's creations? But instead we have to, meanwhile, immediately document it. We need to focus. If it's a good moment, let's see, breathe it in. And if it's a bad moment, let's just don't let it hinder our growth. We're not going to let these negative things get to us. And that's a big lesson we learned from Moshe Rabbeinu, despite all odds, how he reached such heights. It's incredible. Rav Zatzal tells us a person never knows. Person thinks, let's say he's in yeshiva, and he thinks that his life is going to be the same way his whole life. He doesn't know where he's going to end up. We don't know where we're going to end up. We don't know, look at our grandparents in the Holocaust or parents in the Holocaust. People thought they would get this pleasant life in Europe, and look what happened to them. We never know where life is going to bring us, so we have to be prepared that no matter what happens, we're going to keep the faith and keep the rhythm of growth. And that's what Moshe Rabbeinu, growing the way he grew up, it's amazing that he was able to, to do this. One last lesson, well, I've really two more lessons. One more lesson though, right now that we can learn from this week's Parsha about how to, something very important that we have to include in our persona, besides caring about the other person as it would be ourselves, and being careful how we raise our children, and that we have a greatness, and despite all obstacles, we should be able to be prepared. Another thing in this week's Parsha is keeping secrets. Rav tells us, first of all, we talk about the birth of the Mashiach, who was Moshe Rabbeinu in those days. He was the first Mashiach. Vayelech ish mi Beis Levi, and a man from Beis Levi took and married a woman from Beis Levi. Doesn't mention their names. Now we know who they were. It was Amram and Yocheved, but we think often, says Rav, by publicizing something, that's the way a great event's going to happen. It should make the news. It should be all out there for everyone to know about. But the greatest things in life are often kept secret. Tamar and Yehuda was something very secret, and that, a lot of it, Rus and Boaz, are secret, and only those two were there. the Akedah were huge. We ask Hashem in the merit of the Akedah, forgive us on Rosh Hashanah, blow the shofar. There's only 2 people at the Akedah. That's it. It was like interesting that the greatest things in life can be quiet. Why? Because, says Rav Wolbe, secrets are the inner aspects of something. The idea is that, the Jewish people are like a secret, because the rest of the world is very into externals. First thing they ask you at a cocktail party is, what do you do for a living? Like, that's the main thing. Like they look you up and down and see what kind of clothes. Are you wearing Gucci shoes, or what are you wearing with yourself? Or like, how does your lawn look? How does your house look at any given moment? Rev. Victor Miller says a Jewish home shouldn't be perfectly clean unless there's nobody living there. If there's things going on, you're feeding people and you're doing chesed with your home, then it should be lived in. There shouldn't be something. It's not a museum, But in any case, we find that revealing a secret is like the idea of Lashon Hara. We find the idea that in the time of King Shaul was a very holy man, and all the children in those days knew a lot of Torah, and the young people knew a lot of Torah, but they fell in battle. And yet in Achav's generation, Achav was a wicked person, idolater. Nobody died in battle. The reason was that nobody spoke evil about each other in the time of Achav, and therefore they weren't culpable. We find when Moshe Rabbeinu hears Dasan and Aviram proclaim, "Oh, you're the one that killed the Egyptian," or why are you, when everyone knew, when the word was getting around and they knew there was Lashon Hara, he says, "Achen noda davar." I know people are talking. Once people talk, then we aren't worthy of Geulah anymore. That's why he knew we're going to be in Geulah as long as there's Lashon Hara and people revealing secrets. Now, but we said, I mixed this up, so I just want to say it in the proper order now. Secrets, the whole idea of this whole history of speaking Lashon Hara gets us into trouble. We lose lives, and revealing secrets are a way to lose and stay in Geulah, stay in exile. And in fact, if a person keeps secrets, he's very good at keeping somebody else's secret. He is bringing everyone to Geulah, to the redemption, because we said the secret is the essence of something. I'm going to add something I once mentioned. I don't remember where I read this, maybe the Sifsei Chaim. I don't remember, some Musar giant from years ago. You're very close with somebody if you could sit there and not say a word. You have to always fill the conversation when it's somebody you barely know. But if you could just sit with somebody and not say a word, you have a bond. Silence is a big bond between people, and it shows an inner aspect. Whereas you have to talk, it shows you it's only an external type of relationship. If a person reveals a secret, then you're connecting to externality, let's put it that way. And then you will ultimately be subjugated by external peoples. So every time the Jews reveal secrets and reveal gossip and everything like that, they connect more to the external world, and now we are subjugated because we only rule spiritually. We're not meant to rule physically. Our job, in fact, in the world, says Rav Wolbe, is to build an inner world, an active inner world, build our character traits, build our emunah bitachon, build our relationship with others, and relationship with Hashem, and not for others to know. Gives an example, and I didn't know too much about this person, but Rav Wolbe knows about him. He said he always wanted to write biographies of great non-Jews and compare them, lahavdil, to the biographies of great Jews. There was a famous French professor by the name of Albert Schweitzer. He was a French theologian who saw he wasn't getting too far with convincing people of faith. So he took courses in medicine, and then he went to some strange country, they think maybe India. And in India, he ended up healing people. And while he was healing them, he convinced them of God's existence. So it sounds like a really nice act that he did. The problem was he wrote a whole biography about himself, autobiography, to tell everybody every step of the way of everything he did, such as many other great non-Jewish people write these type of autobiographies. And lahavdil, he said, you hear about people like the Chazon Ish, who was so hidden, all the countless acts of kindness he did for people nobody knew anything about. All the orphans and widows that he helped, and giving and giving chizuk to people that felt down. you know, that he didn't show off. So our way is to not talk about what we've done. Once you talk about something, you make it external, and then it loses its inner dimension. It loses its inner dimension. Victor Miller says a person should try once a day to do something that you don't tell anybody about. You know, one good action, of course. Something you do bad, you always don't want to tell anybody about it. But for a good action, you're supposed to keep it quiet. Now, we find many miracles today. So that's really what I wanted to, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about keeping things secrets, talking about caring about the other. These are all lessons from Moshe Rabbeinu and from the Shifra and Puah, from Miriam and Yocheved. And if we want to achieve Torah, we have to be able to, and achieve the Geulah, we have to be able to keep secrets and keep things more idealistic and spiritual rather than to let them out for the public consumption. And we have to care about each Jewish child, that each one is very important to us. Now, we're witnessing many, many miracles now in Israel, parallel to that of the first redemption. We find that Moshe Rabbeinu, Paro was going to kill all the Jews. And in fact, women had 6 children at once. Yocheved was 130 years old. This is what Rav Michal, what was his name? Okay, it's going to come to me. The Birnbaum, Michal Birnbaum, who was the Mashgiach of Moshe. He said that Yocheved was 130 years old, and when she gave birth to Moshe Rabbeinu, was in the darkest part of the exile. All the babies were supposed to be executed. He was saved by the daughter of Paro, grew up in the palace. He was put in the Nile where he wanted to exterminate all the children. He's nursed by his mother. Like, it just shows that, you know, when the time comes, no matter what the news says, no matter what's going on, it'll fly in the face of everything and things will be supernatural. I thank you all for listening. I thank Rivka Shapsa for doing her thing every week. I thank our sponsors for this week. I thank Debbie Menzelewski. Thank you for listening. And now we can unmute ourselves. And if anybody has any questions.